I'm ending the year because Courtney Kube knows what she's talking about, even though she's a University of Michigan graduate and wears Wolverine gear on game day. I'm inviting her on anyway because she's actually probably the finest Pentagon correspondent we have out there. Happy New Year early to you, Courtney.
Happy New Year, Hugh. I'm sorry about your Buckeyes.
Oh, they were robbed.
I'm not really sorry.
I'm
not really sorry.
Did you watch with your husband? He's a Buckeye, isn't he?
He's actually a Buckeye, but he's also a bigger Caps fan. So it was Caps game night as well, I believe.
Oh, okay. Well, we were robbed. Just tell him we were robbed. Courtney, I wanted to talk to you about what happened over the last night. But before I do that, establish for the audience, you're one of those reporters who actually goes to the war zone, like Dexter Filkins, like a bunch of people I've had over the year. When were you most recently in the Iraq-Syria area?
Last month. I was in Iraq and Syria in October and November.
Now, tell people a little bit about the logistics of getting there.
It depends on where you're going. You pretty much can't get into Syria at this point unless you go with the U.S. military. So I flew into Erbil to start, which you can fly in commercially into northern Iraq and Erbil. And then getting into Baghdad's a little bit more difficult. You can go in commercially, but it's really hard as a journalist to get a visa right now. So the military was kind enough to take me into Baghdad for this trip and then also to fly me into Syria. So it's challenging. It's difficult. Candidly, it's dangerous. But the military right now, for the first time in several years, actually wants to take us in and wants to show us what's going on. So I've been lucky enough to be able to take advantage of that several times this year.
Now, Courtney, how many times have you gone in 2019 into the war zone?
I went in 3 times this year, but over the years, I've been covering the war since 2005, so it's several dozen.
It's 15 years of coverage. And when you go, how many people have to come along with you? I was telling people last night that I went and saw Bombshell, and it's true, but it's not true because it doesn't really talk about people like you who are running around in war zones with a bunch of producers and associate producers and technical help and sound guys with booms. What's the crew like?
So for my trips this year, it was just me and a cameraman.
Wow.
We didn't have a producer or anything. I will say when you're with the U.S. military, you're kind of inside of a bubble with them. They provide you your security, and so I appreciate you wanting to highlight the fact that there are reporters who are doing it. But the reality is, we aren't putting ourselves anywhere near the kind of danger that the military people are who were there covering. So we don't. I don't want to make it sound like we're out there as a bunch of heroes. We're there covering our story. It's our job, and it's really the only way you get a sense of what's going on the ground is to actually go there. It's easy to sit back and take statements and have people telling you, and have people here in D.C. at the Pentagon tell you what's going on. But unless you're there on the ground, you don't get a really good sense of what these men and women are actually doing day in, day out.
100% agree. Now, tell me a little bit about the reception that you received from the American military. Are they welcoming to you? Also, you're a woman. It makes it a little bit more difficult for them to accommodate, I assume.
The logistics, especially in Syria at some of the bases, I will admit as a woman, are more difficult. It's not... they don't live a pleasant lifestyle there. So especially when we were in Syria a few weeks ago, they had just moved out of a bunch of bases out of Kobani and the places up in sort of the north and the slightly further west in the north in Syria. So they were in smaller bases. There's no bathrooms, there's no showers. It's not a pleasant day-to-day life for these men and some women, but mainly men who are there. But the military is the ones I was with, the 25th ID in Iraq, outside of Mosul, down in Baghdad. They're all over the place. There's also a security force assistance brigade that's sort of up in the north towards Kirkuk and Erbil, and they all could not have been more accommodating and welcoming. They moved me around. They'll take you if you can get enough lead time and get all the logistics set up. They want to show you what's going on. They took me out to see some of their more remote areas where they're still going after ISIS in Iraq. It's just that it's not the same logistics footprint that we had there in 2005 through 2011 before the U.S. left. There just aren't as many helicopters. There aren't as many planes. So they just can't do as much as they used to do, but they want to help. get the reporters out there.
So tell us what happened last night. You were one of the first to report on this out of the Pentagon, the news that we had struck back. Mike Pompeo had warned the Iran mullahs that if their militia continued to harass and injure Americans, bad things would happen to them. What happened?
So, this Iranian-backed militia group, Kataib Hezbollah, it's been in Iraq and Syria for years. Since 2003, they've been going after Americans and going after Iraqis, frankly. But in the last 2 months, they've really stepped up the assaults on a number of Iraqi bases around the country, with the biggest one coming this past Friday up towards Kirkuk. They launched more than 30 rockets. 30 of them hit inside this Iraqi base, injuring 4 American service members, a number of Iraqi service members, and killing an American contractor. So there have been about a dozen of these types of attacks in the last 2 months, but this one was the first time where an American was actually killed, and so the U.S. responded. They took the president had to approve it because this is obviously striking against a militia group, not against ISIS, which is what the U.S. military is there to do, is to go after ISIS and defeat them. So the president approved this on Saturday, and yesterday the U.S. conducted airstrikes, 3 in Iraq, 2 in Syria, going after these militia groups. They were mainly targeting warehouses where they were storing munitions and rockets. Some of them, a U.S. military official I spoke with said that some of them were the exact munitions warehouses where they were getting the rockets that they were attacking these coalition bases. This has been going on for some time. When I was in Baghdad a couple of weeks ago, there was actually an attack on the base I was at that killed an Iraqi service member and wounded another one. But what really pushed this over the edge for the U.S. military respond was the killing of that American contractor last week. And
did we use F-15s? And if so, do you know where they originated from?
So the military doesn't want to talk about that, but we all know it's an open secret that they have F-15s in Jordan because of the internal political concerns inside Jordan. I suspect that's why they don't want to talk about where they originated from.
Now, to your knowledge, do we cooperate with the Israelis on targeting? They've been following this. They're hitting Syria repeatedly as Iran tries to move weaponry from Iran proper to southern Lebanon. Do they coordinate with our intel people?
So they coordinate. I don't know about these specific strikes. If they did, they talk a lot. But I think people would be surprised about the level of coordination between the U.S. and Israel on some of the Israeli strikes inside Syria. Remember, the U.S. has that garrison at Atanf, which is in southern Syria, down towards the Jordanian border. And the U.S. has to approve Israeli flyovers over that installation. They control the airspace there, the U.S. does. And they don't always approve it. So I think there is a level of coordination and cooperation between the U.S. and Israelis. It's certainly a very close military-to-military and political relationship, especially right now. But they don't always work in conjunction with one another on strikes like the one we saw yesterday.
And Courtney, the rockets that the militia have been using, there are these rockets that come from Gaza, and I've been in Israel when they've landed, and they can hurt you if they hit you in the head. And then there are the rockets from southern Lebanon, which are killers. What kind of rockets have these militias been using?
So they've been using a combination in these more recent strikes. Some of them are these Katyusha rockets, which are old Soviet. They're cheap. They're prolific. They're not very accurate, but they're quick to set up. It's like this multiple rocket launcher system. They're really quick to set up and break down. So they're popular with these militia groups. But they haven't just been using the Katyushas recently. In fact, they've used rockets as large as 240 millimeter. That's a big rocket. They have a little bit more accuracy to them as well. So it's fair to say there was a stretch summer when the tensions were really high between the U.S. and Iran, and there was a lot of concern there was going to actually be an all-out war. There was a stretch that these militia groups actually didn't do anything against Iraqis or the U.S. in Iraq. They quieted down for a piece. So this uptick in the past 2 months really has been significant, and it's been an increasing level of concern for the U.S. military there, as these militia groups are just pushing the boundaries over and over and over on what they can get away with without some sort of U.S. military response. And it was crossing that line of actually killing an American last week that elicited this response.
We'll continue to follow this with Courtney. Follow her on Twitter, C. Kube, C-K-U-B-E, NBC. That's C as in Charlie, K-U-B-E, NBC on Twitter. Always the first with the most important story. Courtney Kube, thank you for joining me. Happy New Year to you. Go Bucks. We'll overlook that Michigan stuff.